Hi friends, today we're going to be talking about what is working with J1 waivers. Specifically, we're going to look at one country, and that's going to be Egypt. We're going to look at a few cases that we recently got approved from Egypt, and we're going to talk about what is working in 2024 and in 2023 so you can learn what works now. So you want to stay tuned till the very end because we're going to talk about processing times, we're going to talk about strategies. Even if you're not from Egypt, they will apply across the board. So let's get to it. My name is Ranchod, immigration lawyer that's been practicing over 20 years, and now let's deep dive. First, before we dive into the facts, I want to make sure you understand what qualifies for a J1 exceptional hardship waiver. You need to have not only exceptional hardship, and in the case if it's a spouse, that would be hardship if you're separated from your U.S. citizen spouse, or if you had to relocate. If it's based off of hardship to a child and you're on a J1, your spouse is on a J2, then you only have to prove exceptional hardship if you're relocating. So let's talk about now what qualifies as a qualifying relative. That would be a U.S. citizen spouse, lawful permanent resident spouse, or a U.S. citizen child, lawful permanent resident child. If you don't have either of those, you don't qualify, and you could look at some other waiver options such as the persecution waiver, the no objection waiver, the IGA waiver. Now, in this video, specifically talk about the J1 exceptional hardship waiver. First of all, let's talk about the processing time. So in this particular case, the first case study that I'm going to talk about, we filed with USCIS and Department of State April 11th, 2022. Department of State processed the case about 14 days later on April 25th, 2022. Then Department of State processed the I-613 from USCIS February 21st, 2023. The I-613 is basically the favorable recommendation from USCIS. So you can see here, it didn't take USCIS that long to make a decision. The holdup here was with the Department of State. So USCIS in this case made that favorable recommendation, issued the I-613, and it was sent over to Department of State. Then the Department of State took almost a year to issue a favorable recommendation on January 18th, 2024. So you'll see here that in this case, it was approved in less than 2 years. It took about a year and 9 months, approximately, until the Department of State issued the favorable recommendation. But then it took USCIS almost another month to issue their approval on the final approval on February 6, 2024. So total time was about 22 months for this case. Now let's look at the arguments that we made. Here, the hardship was to the U.S. citizen child. One of the core elements of our exceptional hardship strategy was if the children were forced to leave the United States, they would face exceptional hardship. We highlighted that in Egypt, the J1's American child suffered from lead poisoning due to the country conditions exacerbating his health. And for this family, remaining together in the United States was not just a preference, but it was an absolute necessity. Here, the stakes were extremely high because failure to secure the J1 waiver would have meant uprooting this entire family, including the spouse and children who were J2 dependents. So in some situations, we have children who are U.S. citizens and are J2 dependents. In the end, we were able to obtain a successful J1 waiver because of our meticulous preparation. We go above and beyond in preparing our legal brief. And that's what it takes with J1 waivers, because these are very difficult to obtain. It's not just filling out the forms or preparing a simple statement. We really go above and beyond to make sure we know we've done everything that we could have as a firm to get an approval. And that's what we did in this case, and we were able to get the case approved. That was our first case study from Egypt. Now we're going to go to our second case study from Egypt, where there was 3 American U.S. citizen children. First of all, let's look at the processing times for this case. We filed the case with the Department of State December 8th, 2021. The case was processed by Department of State and received on March 18th, 2022. The Department of State processed the I-613 from USCIS on July 12th, 2022. Here you'll see that it took USCIS only 8 months to process a favorable recommendation. Well, only 8 months in the bizarre world of immigration, that is a short time. Now let's look how long the Department of State took. The Department of State issued favorable recommendation on January 3rd, 2024, and USCIS approved the case on January 12th, 2024. So here you'll see that it took a little over 2 years. Now let's dive into what worked in this case for the exceptional hardship. We argued that the hardship imposed on the 3 American children met the high exceptional hardship standard to waive the 2-year home residency requirement because of the poor conditions in the home country, which would exacerbate their hardship if they were forced to relocate. We also emphasized that the J1's presence in the U.S. was of great benefit to the United States. As a renowned scholar, he had over 400 citations for his published work in top-tier publications, and his contributions to academia and research are significant. And then the other argument we made is that the U.S. citizen children should not be denied opportunities in the United States, and if they had to relocate, that would be a form of denying them their basic rights, their basic opportunities in the United States if they had to leave for 2 years. And we were able to get this case approved. All right, let's move on to our third case study. In this case, we have a U.S. citizen child as the qualifying relative, and here we have as the applicant a physician from Egypt. All right, let's look at the processing times in this case. We filed the case with USCIS and Department of State on April 20th, 2020. Department of State processed the case on June 2nd, 2020. Department of State then processed the I-613 from USCIS on December 1st, 2022. Then the Department of State issued a favorable recommendation on January 4th, 2024, and USCIS approved the case January 17th, 2024. Here, this case was one of the longer cases that I've seen. It took a ridiculously long amount of time for this case to get approved, but at least we got it approved. Now let's look at what we did to get the case approved. We argued that the hardship imposed on the American child meets the rigorous exceptional hardship standard required to waive the residency requirement. One of the arguments that we made is that the child would not receive the appropriate medical care in Egypt. Here specifically, the child was receiving occupational therapy and their child would not be able to get that occupational therapy in their home country. We also emphasized that the J1 and his family are Christians and the American child attends a Catholic school, which would add to the danger and ostracization in Egypt. Here we also talked about financial hardship because the salary that the J1 applicant would have in Egypt would not be enough to cover their daily expenses. And then finally, we highlighted the value of allowing the J1 to work in the US as his research has been published in top-tier journals with practical implications for investors, regulators, and public practice. Through thorough preparation and persuasive argumentation, we were successfully able to secure the waiver for the J1, ensuring that the family was kept together. And that's why we do what we do, because it's all about families staying together, being unified, being as a whole. And let's talk about our next case study. Here, the physician was also from Egypt. The qualifying relative was a U.S. citizen child. Now, in this case, it was unique because the J1 holder had already fulfilled part of the 2-year requirement, making it crucial to demonstrate the conditions in the J1's home country where the American child resided. Here, we also argued that the J1 holder had significant skills as a physician, and that was a positive equity that they were contributing to the United States as a physician. And we talked about the significant contributions made by the doctor as well to the U.S. For cases like this one, where the waiver is based on exceptional hardship to a child, and the child's other parent is not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, the focus is merely on providing exceptional hardship if the child were to accompany the J1 to the J1's home country. Now, this is because the child cannot stay in the U.S. without the J1. We made all of these arguments, and based off of these arguments, we were able to get this case approved. Our next case study is based off of a physician from Egypt with U.S. citizen children. Let's look at the processing times here. Here, we filed the case with USCIS and Department of State December 16th, 2021. Department of State processed the case on March 18th, 2022. Department of State processed the I-613 from USCIS on April 19th, 2023, and Department of State issued a favorable recommendation on January 25th, 2024. Finally, the case was approved on February 1st, 2024. Here we argued that the scenario of relocation would result in exceptional hardship, and this was supported by a history of exceptional medical hardship during a prior stay in Egypt where specialized care was unavailable. Additionally, there was exceptional hardship inherent in the country conditions in Egypt. Furthermore, we emphasized the value of allowing the J1 to remain in the US, as the J1 is a brilliant researcher sought after for his widely cited work, which was in the public interest. Through his very meticulous preparation and persuasive arguments, we were able to prepare a detailed legal brief, and then those we go above and beyond and got the case approved. And last but not least, our final case study. Here, another physician from Egypt with a U.S. citizen child. Let's look at the facts. We filed the case on March 7th, 2022. Department of State processed the case April 11th, 2022. The Department of State processed the I-613 on September 29th, 2022. Department of State issued a favorable recommendation December 27th, 2023, and USCIS approved the case on January 12th, 2024. Here are arguments centered on the hardship that would be imposed on the American child if the waiver was denied because of the family's relocation to Egypt. Here, the U.S. citizen child had a medical condition and could not get the adequate care if they were to go back to Egypt. The way we supported this was with the medical records of the child and a letter from the child's physician. With Egyptian cases, of course, we always like to talk about the country conditions as well, and we highlight all of that in all of our Egyptian cases. Is there significant country conditions, including the rampant inflation, access to medical care, and high pollution. Also, the American citizen child is not fluent in Arabic and would confront significant culture shock and language barriers if compelled to move. We also underscored the exceptional financial hardship the family would face as they would struggle to provide for the child's necessities, and we provided supporting documentation including information on the cost of living in Egypt and articles detailing the country's current economic and employment conditions. And we were able to get that case approved. So here you can see what we're doing here for our J1 waivers to get the case approved. We get the necessary supporting documentation to support our legal arguments in our brief, and that's where we really go above and beyond. And that's why we were able to get these cases approved. I invite you to subscribe so you continue to get these updates. And if you have any questions, post them below. And until next time, bye.